Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so happy to have you all here joining us today. I'm watching our screen fill up with lots of amazing people here from our network joining us. And I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes while we get everybody in. And while we're doing that, if you wouldn't mind getting settled in the chat and sharing with us your names, the state you're coming from, so we can kind of get a feel of who's in our audience today. So we'll start with that chat. Hey, Roger, great to have you here. It's one of the fun parts of starting out this way is looking at where we're touching across the country with some amazing content.
I'm seeing a lot of Roger Shermans.
I bet that Roger shared his link far and wide to get everybody on today, which is wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a really packed, great session planned for you today. My name is Kira Georgia, and I work with the Children's Trust Fund Alliance as the Alliance National Parent Partnership Associate, and that gives me the privilege of being able to connect with our Birth Parent National Network members and help to kind of put on these wonderful events and meetings. And today we really have decided to focus on a topic that we know is on the minds of many people across the country and their communities, and really looking at how is race being elevated in your community? How are we talking about it? How are we really looking at its impacts on policies, programs, and most importantly, the lives of children and families? And so I am joined today by a couple fellow facilitators, and so I'm going to pull up our presentation and get us started for today. And so I'd now like to turn it over to my dear colleague, Edward Casillas. Edward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edward Casillas. I am a BPNN member here from Arizona. And with us today is Tucoria Jones. Tucoria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Gladly. Tucoria Jones, Birth Parent Network member in South Carolina.
Thank you, Tucoria. We're so happy to have everyone with us today as we have this important conversation about race. I'm going to begin by sharing a few updates, and then we will get right into today's presentation. We will open up for questions for the final 15 minutes of today's webinar. We encourage you to type your questions in the chat box as we go through the presentation today, and we look forward to having a great conversation. I want to start by reminding everyone that the Alliance is still holding our weekly caring conversations as part of the Resiliency Project. Our next one will be next Monday, and we would love to have you all join us. You will see a link to register posted in the chat. This is a great opportunity for our networks to come together and talk and share as we navigate these unusual and difficult times. We will also send out the invite by email, and we hope you can join us. Well, I can't believe this year is almost over, but I'm sure most of us can't wait for it to be over. But we will have our final BPNN webinar in December, and it will be for our 6th virtual convening. You don't want to miss this exciting event, as we encourage you to watch for more information coming very soon. Also, we know everyone is super busy, and so we want to remind you that if you're unable to join us, we do record all webinars, and you can access them on the Alliance website under the BPNN tab. I would like to now turn it over to friend and colleague, Corey Best, one of our own BPNN members who has been doing some amazing work down in Florida, and also has been helping many communities to think about how we can get into talks and discussions on race. Corey, I just want to welcome you. Thank you for being here and talking about these important topics. And now I'd like to turn it over to you. Thank you, Corey.
Well, thank you so much, Edward. I really appreciate the introduction, and good afternoon, morning to everybody. We will attempt to really cover some basics. So I hope that this will be a first of many series. This will not be a historical sort of educational moment. This will be more about how we begin to understand how history has shaped and socialized us. Basically, when I say us, we're socialized in uh, a world of whiteness, and what I mean exactly is race talk often elicits several emotional and cognitive avoidance strategies that we don't particularly pay too much attention to. We have a standard that's a master narrative, right? So I'm going to ask if everyone can mute their phone. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback here. Uh, we have a master narrative that often gives us these clues about how we must navigate the emotional waters of racial dialogue and discourse, right? So, for instance, when we think about a white normative, heteronormative worldview, we often see or hear about only hard work and determination will get you to where you need to be. People should not be judged based on their skin color. Others are, although racism is, truly destructive, it's a thing of the past, right? And that we live in this glorious melting pot and should not see color. Those are just a few of the master narratives. Now, when we get into dialogue, however, we have to elevate the fact that wherever there's a narrative, there's a counter narrative. So it's kind of hard to sometimes know which story is actually true, right? And that counter narrative and I won't speak for all individuals of color, but that counter narrative is similar to what we like to call in Black culture black talk, right? So that black talk or that back talk or that counter narrative gives us the impression that we have a place to fit in this conversation, that we should adhere to several norms of how to sort of have conversation without emotion, understanding that this is trauma we're talking about here, right? So often that rage that some of the white world may feel, wherever there's rage, I've heard it said that something has happened to someone, and we often pay attention to the actors, but very little do we examine the environment in which those actors are indeed performing. So when it comes to effective race talk, most of what I'll share today is research, right? So there's a lot of research around how individuals conform, how individuals challenge normative protocols, and how individuals have effective race talk. But the counter narrative from the Black experience often is, or non-white experience, right? Because we have complex identities. So I want to be mindful of that as well. But it also gives us a connotation that uh, the world, due to whiteness, is blaming those of us that are most harmed by one, the invention of whiteness and race. And I'll say that again, the invention. So, like the freight train, the wheel, technology, and invention that causes us to react and respond to certain things. Tone policing is another, right? So we're taught that we should not have emotions, that we have to watch our inflection and our dialect, and it has to be on point all the time, and that those emotions need to be left at home when you come into the workplace, and therefore these norms really sort of prevent us from having effective conversations even with our children, loved ones, and colleagues. Dismissiveness is something else that we often received due to the prolonged trauma and activation. Communication styles are something that we must really pay attention to in this sort of conversation as we grow into having more effective racial dialogue. Now, for instance, when you think of how the world has sort of conditioned us based on the fact that we've made this myth of race real, it's not only a false construct, however, it's now a legal construct as well. And I'll give you an example. So, Native and other non-white ethnicities, racial categories are historically and have been seen as other. So we get into this position of othering people based on the comparison to the white standard. And so when we begin to other people, we have given descriptors of a full racial group of people as primitive. So you think of Native Americans for just a moment, indigenous, those who uh, have broken treaties, and we're working and we're living and we're having this conversation right now on stolen land. Uh, they're called primitive, savage, uncivilized, which commonly is known as normalization. So we have normalized the invisibility of whiteness and deemed other groups of people less than, inferior, or worse, criminals, even. Or worse, we blame some of the inequities that we see on morality. Or worse, people do not work hard enough, right? And so when we think of this normalization in this conversation, we're not often bringing and unpacking these things that sort of give us white dominant, mono and ethnocentric worldviews. So these are critically important as we begin to unpack a way that you can think of setting parameters later on. I have a bullet in one of the last slides that you have to be able to teach people how to treat you, right? And what I mean by that is we fear so much about speaking our truth, because when we speak our truth, often uh, in conversations of race, there is a clash. And a part of speaking our truth from, again, I can't always speak for a white perspective, but when from a black body's perspective, I know whiteness, right? So I understand how I'm conditioned. Speaking my truth often for me, interpersonally, I must begin to recognize everything that I've added that is negative to a racial group of individuals, right? And in this conversation, speaking truth is not just being polite. We're going to offend people sometimes. We're going to misstep. But this is an opportunity for us to be vulnerable in a space of having conversation, leaning into the discomfort and one another, committing to non-closure, embracing the and both, right? And seeking intentional learning, not perfection. So today, whoa, we have about what 40 minutes to discuss how to discuss all of that you see right now. What is all of that? That's our socialization. If we wanted to, these conversations can take us back as far as 13th, 14th, 15th century. We can go to 1492 if we wanted to. When we're more nuanced in our analysis, some people do look at how this has become a global pandemic and created several layers of division. However, today is not a day of really unpacking the history, but what I wanted to show is that for centuries, we have continued to avoid the fact that America formed its identity in 1776. That identity is fully white identity, and that identity is also, when we begin to unpack and source the trace of the trauma, that identity is formed in violence as well. So it's hard to have conversations that ultimately pierce the heart. And as we begin to think about Reconstruction and the new Jim Crow, this invention of whiteness and this invention of othering and this invention of racial categorization has led to where we are today. We've seen major successes and setbacks, but I'll say that in this conversation, when you see this progression, this gives many in the white culture the belief that we live in a post-racial society in which we do not. And so the question is often asked of me, Corey, why lead with race? So for me, I believe that we must understand the formation of our indoctrination and begin to question and critique that indoctrination, asking more why questions. And also, why I lead with race is to put race and racism in the foreground of any conversation or debate. We know that in conversation, we're either in one or two sort of spectrums. We're advocating or we're inquiring, right? Rarely are we in balance where there's a fair level of inquiry and a fair level of advocacy. Many of us, especially in systems work or with our own children, we are advocating for position, right? A position, the position is based on how we see the world and that that world is right to us. It addresses racism explicitly, but not necessarily exclusively. We will ultimately get to the intersections in most of the time. The majority of the conversations I've had, I would say that 50% of the room will run to the intersection. That intersection meaning, I am woman too, and I am oppressed. Do you know what gays had to go through to get their rights? All of these intersections. And of course, if we are having effective race talk based on the foundation and our indoctrination, we will begin to see, as Pablo Freire teaches us, the pedagogy of oppression. We are all oppressed based on the system that has created the environment in which we live in. So some examples of why I choose to lead with race in conversation with one another, with others, is it gives examples of profiling, right? Racially biased early care and education. Why are all the black kids being suspended from preschool? I mean, preschool, right? So environmental racism, transit racism, racial redlining, the child welfare practices are an iteration of slavery and the thought that we need to save and rescue individuals, and also the elusive conversation of power. I'm going to slash out privileges there, and I'll tell you why in just a little bit. Power, advantages, and those dynamics, right? Because right now we have sort of bombarded the conversation with white privilege. We have several white people owning their privilege in public, but white privilege is a term that was coined by a white woman. Black people have been talking about disadvantages for hundreds of years, and no one globally has acknowledged that. It was until Peggy McIntosh coined the phrase unpacking your white privilege. White privilege is something that Frederick Douglass talked about, something that W.E.B. Du Bois spoke of, things that Audre Lorde talked about, those terrible years of lynching that we know about. These were traumas, these were advantages that whites had based on their skin tone. I think it goes above and beyond privileges. So, what I want to do is I'm going to put in the chat. I want to have some interaction with you here for just a moment. I have posed a question to you in the chat. And so I see a different set of slides here. I was under the impression that I was driving my slides the whole time. Is someone just really keeping up with me really good or what?
That would be Kara.
Okay, got it. Now I know. That is good information to know. So uh, here's the scenario you have in your chat. It is so tiring, it sucks you dry. People don't trust you from the moment I, black man, wake up. I know stepping out of the door that it will be the same day after day. The bus can be packed, but no one will sit next to you. I guess it may be a good thing because you always get more room. No one crowds you. You can get served. You can get served last. When they serve you, they have this phony smile and just want to get rid of you. You have to show more ID than the person in front of you to get your check cashed. You turn on the TV, and there you always see someone like you being handcuffed, put in jail, or even killed. They look like you, and sometimes you begin to think, shh, it is me. You are plagued. You try to hold it in, but sometimes you lose it. Explaining doesn't help. They don't when they ask, why do you have a chip on your shoulder? Shit, I just want to walk away now. It doesn't do any good explaining. So let's talk this out a little bit. We have 7 questions there. If a few people can just respond in the chat or even unmute yourselves, and let's just walk through no more than 2 minutes of these questions. So I want to know what's the reality from your worldview. So I would prefer if white individuals would respond to the question. So I see that there is a their loss. I'm not sure what that's referring to. Maybe it's the seat on the bus. Um, who are we to invalidate his experiences, right? And so that's a critical piece to the conversation. It reminds me of the video about microaggressions. Things build up over time. Maggie, I want to assure you that there's nothing micro about aggressions. So you can scratch off the preface there. Again, another white term that we use that doesn't fully uncover the impact of aggressive behavior. No judgment. It's experience, and I appreciate that, Karen, because now we're in the phase of listening, right? In the phase of listening, not to help, not to coddle, not to fix anything, but just acknowledging that this is his perspective. So, is it up to us to believe that or not, right? And if you do not, what are the reasons behind that? And Kara, we can go ahead and move to the next to the next slide. And so what I'm going to do here is give you another scenario. And this is from an academic perspective. And this will sort of prime us for a deeper conversation. And here we go. So this is a teacher discussing racial issues in class is one of my greatest fears as a white teacher. Nothing good ever seems to come from it. Last week, we discussed the intersection of race and law. New York City stop and frisk policy came up. Some of the students of color called it racial profiling, but one student indirectly implied it was warranted because of crime stats. He, the white student, stated that most crimes were committed by blacks, especially in Harlem. It was a provocative moment, and the exchanges were explosive. Students of color accused certain classmates of being racially biased. Most of the white students were scared to death and refused to participate. One white female student began to cry. I tried my best to comfort her and admonish students to respect one another. When that didn't work, the teacher tables the conversation. For the rest of the semester, wherever the topic of race arose, we avoided it like the plague, right? When the semester ended, we were all relieved. So I see Jenny saying, Karen, don't cry. Jenny, go ahead and unpack that for people who may not recognize that sometimes you, as Jenny, you get claimed or deemed to be the white liberal who's always talking about justice, right? So these are the things that comes out in the conversations that we must confront. And I want to interact with you all here for just a little while. What makes talking about race such a difficult hot button issue is the first question. Let's go there for just a moment. Let's unpack why we feel it's difficult. So Eileen says the history is unknown. Reading and listening to true accounts of history will help dismantle all of this. We respond and attack the wrong people. Fear of doing it wrong. Well, Roger, I will say that equity and justice must feel different, and it's something we've never experienced it before. So I'm not sure if we can take the fear of doing it wrong and attach that to always having the need to do it right. And is that the white standard? Or are we embracing some of the messiness of this conversation, right? So I see that uh, there is discussion race within a group requires each white person to address the racism within themselves. I agree to an extent there. It can be uncomfortable, right? So Vincia, fear of being accountable for the feelings that they aren't right. So this need, I'm seeing this thread of this need to be right, right? And I don't know your racial identity, but I'm going to pose a positive assumption that many are responding from a white perspective are saying that they have to be right. Lyman says white people frequently conflate safety and comfort. Right on, my man. It makes it hard to lean into the necessary discomfort of the work. And so I appreciate the fact that you raised safety, because in the conversation of safety, I think it's safe to say that we're all safe. We were having a conversation yesterday. I encouraged my group to think about how might we be brave in this conversation, right? How might we begin to be a little bit braver? There are some things, Kara, I'll move forward here. There are some things that we know about race talk, and I'll begin to unpack them in just a little bit. However, Cornell West says that the country is in deep trouble. We've forgotten that a rich life consists fundamentally of serving others, trying to leave the world a little bit better than you found it. We need the courage to question the powers that be, the courage to be impatient with evil and patient with people, the courage to fight for social justice. In many instances, we will be stepping out on nothing and just hoping to land on something. But that, my dear friends, that is the struggle. We have no blueprint for this. To live is to wrestle with despair, yet never allow despair to have the last word. So, that tells me a lot. So we have these dualities, and social media has made it very easy for people to appear possibly as something that they are not, right? We deem people bad, and that's a part of the fear, I believe, from having conversations with white people. The fear of seeming racist, the fear of taking responsibility for their racism. Kara, I'll move forward. The fear of taking responsibility for their racism. So we have some societal norms, and again, these are excerpts and extractions from research done by Daryl Wing Sue. And where I'm going here is that we have these three sort of buckets of society protocol to have this conversation. And the first is, the politeness protocol, right? As Daryl Wingsu coins it. This politeness protocol says that things are about race based on the messages that we've gotten from our whiteness, right? These conversations about race are spoken in very light and casual ways, right? And also in a superficial manner, because addressing topics of race, racism, and whiteness and advantages really are discouraged in favor of us being kumbaya-ish with one another, right? And friendly with one another. Well, I will say that, I was recently reminded by a pioneer that you all are aware of. I had the luxury of having a conversation with the only Angela Davis. And in that conversation, she reminds me that politeness and coming together in friendly solidarity will do much for bias reduction and prejudice reduction, but it'll do very little for collective action. And so, non-white individuals believe in collectivism, believe in emotional levels of conversation because of the idealism that whiteness has versus the realism that Black people experience. We often tend to settle on, okay, it's good enough for the room. We'll just be nice and we'll table that conversation as the teacher did, because I don't want to offend anybody and I don't want to really be real about it. Because if I am the facilitator of this conversation, I too, even in Black body, I have to show the world somehow what I feel about this conversation. And therefore, am I losing decorum? Am I losing respect of my group, or am I upholding my standard of practice, which is a sort of politeness? So in social gatherings, public places, classrooms, and neighborhoods, race talk is even seen as improper, right? So when you think about what we do to avoid, it gets us into this academic protocol. So Bell hooks remind us that empirical reality is valued over experiential reality. And so that's also a part of the crux, the bind, the ideological struggle. See, from my experiences, I've had several. I mean, you all can imagine, like literally every day since May 25th of this year, literally every single day, I have more than one of these conversations per day, right? And so what I mean is, uh, when I speak my truth or amplify the voice of someone, I often have someone say that I need proof of that, right? So I want to put it to you in a context where I hope that it doesn't trigger anybody's sort of trauma, and if I do, it is not intended. But I'm thinking about the impact here. So if I were out 15 years ago with some friends and I decided to have a drink, and me and my date, let's just say me and my date, we went up to the room, and I decided, on my own terms, that I would go up and have a drink with my date, and then I passed out. So when I passed out, everything became foggy. I didn't really remember what was happening. I don't know what was going on. And then, I came to. So my friends were saying, hey, uh, your date was a little sketchy, a little iffy, but we tried to say, you shouldn't do that. And you said, hey, I'm grown and I can do this. And you trusted your date. So, boom, things happen. Things happen in a negative way, but you couldn't piece everything together. You had no way of really verifying what you felt in your heart to be real based on when you came to how you were disheveled and some of the things that were happening in your physiological being. So I fast forward. We're now in the present, and all of these memories are starting to surface. Now, I'm still in relationship with those same friends. Those same friends are helping me to piece this night together. So I get into a group of well-intended professionals, and I say, you know what? My experiences from 15 years ago are starting to come to surface, and I'm remembering that something tells me I think I was raped. And that group says to me a few things. That was 15 years ago. Look at you now. Look at all the good work you do today. Why are you even worried about that? A couple of others say, well, can you like prove that that has happened to you? And then you may have one or two others that say, we really believe you. We want to acknowledge that these things may have happened to you. But since we have, can you come and teach us how not to rape again? So we also put a lot of weight based on the need of having empirical data on the victims of racialized trauma, similarly to what we do to women who have been traumatized by the violence imposed upon them by their perpetrators. So when we don't uncover the reality and the need to defy these protocol that we have here, will remain colorblind, and that's where I really want to unpack for just a moment. So colorblindness, uh, I'll just read an excerpt here. It is quite simply put as this. When we begin to have racial conversations, it threatens to unmask unpleasant and unflattering secrets about their role in the perpetuation of oppression. Avoiding racial conversation seems to have the basic fundamentals related to denial, right? So denial is the anchor in this conversation. And a denial of color is really a denial of difference. The denial of differences is really a denial of power and advantages. The denial of power and advantages is really a denial of personal benefits that accrue to whites by virtue of racial inequities. The denial that many white people profit from racism is really a denial of responsibility for their racism. And lastly, the denial of racism is really a denial of the necessity to take action against racism. When we begin to understand the psychology of race talk from the perspective of white Americans and people of color, it will have huge and major implications for how we and our society can use the knowledge to effectively have effective race conversations. So, yes, Eileen, I will make sure you get the link to Daryl Wing Sue's research. And so, when you think about those protocol, many ways, all of us, even in Black body, uphold politeness, academic, or colorblind methodology, right? None of that right there, those tools that we have attained in our years of education and our years of certification and our years of advocacy, uh, upholding that system is upholding the current structure. In order to talk about race, we must see race. So, fear of realizing racism becomes a huge thread. Fear of appearing racist, fear of confronting the impact of whiteness, and let's think about whiteness for a moment, not from an interpersonal perspective, but a cultural one as well. So whiteness is a culture, and we all adhere to that culture one way or another. Sometimes, depending upon, I made the little comment about Jenny and her social justice stance, right? So we are friends. So I understand Jenny very well. However, many neoconservative white people will also deem the Jennies of the world the liberal crazy ones, right? And so if I were in Black body and I was the one upholding politeness, academic, and colorblind methodology, some of my Black families and friends may also give me a term. Some of those terms, if we really want to talk about unmasking the ugliness, some of those terms are a do gooder. Some of those terms are I'm trying to be white. Some of those terms are I'm an Uncle Tom, right? So we have these polarizing things going on in our mind that really attaches to the three protocol we have here. We can move forward. Uh, so I want to make sure I try to speed up a little bit. I did just take a sip of coffee, so I'm gonna do this real quick. Um, and so denial of personal biases and prejudices. One, we've heard this, right? I have nothing against blacks, but some of my family members are uncomfortable with them. Some others we may have heard. I'm not biased because I date outside of my race, right? I'm not biased, but I can see how other whites can be. I think it's critically important for white people to understand how even intra-racially you are often upholding a power dynamic. So when white people become more woke or more conscious in their growth and development, think about how you all even begin to other white people. So I'm encouraging us to recognize that we're all on a spectrum of learning, and the more that we ostracize and deem people uh, something other than what they may be, I encourage us to look at the environment in which they thrive or attempt to thrive, because there's a threat in the environment that causes us or prevents us from not even wanting to engage in the conversation. I encourage Black people to sort of begin to relieve yourselves of the need to take care of white people. Uh, Give care, but not take care, right? I am going to ask that you all begin to care more for yourself and also live in your truth based on your empirical data of knowing what the world has done to produce inequities. And also, that'll give you a lot of freedom and flexibility to have conversations when you extend the invitation to others who may not think like you, and vice versa. So the next slide, please. So when we think about that root of denial, I want us to understand some of the messages that may be bombarding your thinking right now, right? That post-racial era. Whites aren't prejudiced. Remember, we elected a black president, right? Well, during Reconstruction, those 10 years, we also had black legislators and legislative seats in South Carolina. But the question that Henry Louis Gates encouraged to answer is, how do we take a freedman and make him a slave again, right? I think that has to do with the invention of whiteness and advantages myself, but that's an informed opinion as well. Racism is not a thing of the past. It's something that we must believe. We must begin to understand how to live with, right? How to live with and challenge in our interpersonal spheres. And the more we do that in our interpersonal spheres, we'll be able to come together cross racially and solidify and begin to examine systems. My grandparents and parents didn't own any slaves. We've heard this. We are not a racist society. We are one of democracy, of equal opportunity. We are one where you work hard enough, right? Anyone can succeed in this society if they work hard enough. Um, my parents, just like your parents, said to me, Corey, work hard. You have to work hard because it's just an important value to have as a young man. But working hard is not the only demonstrative action that one takes in his life that determines his or her trajectory. Blackness and whiteness plays a huge role in one's trajectory. People of color keep playing the race card. I don't know what that means yet. I'm still trying to understand what that means. 97% of people who've been tested, who've been studied through a psychological course, state that color blindness is virtually impossible to even have. So why do we even have the term? You see me based on my physical attributes first, and we've made those physical attributes socially important. Why does everything have to be about race? We've heard this is really not a race issue, but a class issue. Again, we are skirting and going into the intersections. So these are some of the things, the denials, the social norms, the protocol that we have that I encourage you to think about as you begin to evolve in your savvy when it comes to having conversations that you're confronting things head on and with knowledge. The opportunity myth here. So we've heard again that meritocracy, it is critically important. I am not discounting the need for hard work. But one of the things that we do in systems work is start with data. Unfortunately, that data tells a different story depending upon your worldview. So if you're not steeped in understanding the systems of inequities, you may see data that says high school dropout rate is higher amongst black students than whites, and that may give you the idea that it's a moral deficiency. But when you look at the establishment of wealth, for an example, uh, we see here in just a short little skit called The American Dream that whites were and have been advantaged and have been given an opportunity to begin to establish global wealth, right? Through the theft of native land, free labor from slavery. Uh, we're still reaping the benefits of that. And so when you look at this white gentleman, looking back at this young black man, his question is, are you just slow or what? That bubble, that question in our heads, that question right there, uh, we have similar thinking when we see outcomes in community, when we see outcomes in child welfare, when we see outcomes in school and income. What that white guy's asking is what's often in our minds, right? And so when I look at just the data here, it shows that in 2018, the income versus poverty. So we have 20.7% of our Black families are in poverty, overall poverty rate in 2018, and you see the income. We can move forward, Kara. Then we have this large gap, right? This large wealth gap. And so what I'd like to really acknowledge here from my perspective is if that 6 trillion to 102 trillion dollars were just about even cut 50%, we may not be so uh, disgusted by the racial inequities. I believe that equality, can we go back just a moment? I believe that equality is really a myth that we're never going to see. I don't think we want equality. And I'm not always certain that it is about inequities that gets us up in arms. I think it's the glaring gap in the span of inequities, and that inequities look the same across all systems, from school to corporate America, to who's in management positions, to who's building and establishing wealth. Like in every facet of the globe, we see this level of disparity. So it's the gap in the inequities that we really must begin to talk about and begin to shade. You can move forward here. Now, again, we've given you a lot with about 10 more seconds to go. I mean, 10 more minutes to go. And in order to really continue to have effective racial dialogue, I would encourage you to understand how history has shaped our identity. So internal, we are now talking about sort of this prejudice reduction, this harm reduction, this bias reduction, how we internalize superiority or inferiority. We haven't talked about the power in economics as the drivers to this infinity circle. Believe me, our beliefs, our thinking, our mindset, our rationalizations and justifications show up in how we write policy. So the interpersonal and how we write policy and how we uphold policy come out in the external. Again, history shapes our culture shapes our identity, and I believe that over 200 people on this call today would like to co-create a new identity, and that will get us to, you can move forward, more effective race talk. Can we? So uh, here's some things that you can do today, right now. One, build your racial literacy. Learn from racial groups, and this may seem simple or like common sense, but my mother also told me that sense ain't that common, and I don't know why we got to pay for attention because it's free. Learn about other racial groups from within that group, not from the newspapers, not from your biases, not from what you believe or have been told about individuals. Learn from other racial groups from having conversation, immersive conversations with that racial group. And similarly to what Black people and non-white people have to do every single day, we learn whiteness every single day, right? And this is what we're asking you to do. If you really want to understand how to have effective racial dialogue, talk with people that are not within your racial category. Really simple, but if you think about your 6 friends, your closest 6 friends, probably 90% of you have 6 closest friends that you're vulnerable with that are your power bubble. Those 6 friends inform your worldview. Those 6 friends are more likely to earn like you, talk like you, think like you, dress like you, date like you, right? and raise kids. You want us to begin to think about how we could move into a true multicultural dimension because we're not there yet with English being the primary language. We are not in a multicultural environment. I see you, Lucretia. I'm keeping a pulse on time, really good. Um, and so we want to embrace your biases and fears, develop a personal action plan, talk with your kids, commit to action. Again, I can't reinforce it enough. Teach people how to treat you. You set the parameters for the conversation. And for white people, sometimes to wait for the invitation. Because often white people come in conversations with a ready set toolbox. And I just have to say that the toolbox that you got from your collegiate days and the toolbox that you got from being colorblind and the toolbox you got from learning how to live in fear about having a conversation or doing the wrong things will not work in this conversation of advancing racial justice. Last slide, please. So, cultivating a new identity. The truth of the matter is that, like this Venn diagram shows us, from fear down to denial and naivety down to color blindness will not sort of get us into anti-racist thinking and social justice. Become color bold in your work, your lives, especially right now, especially if you have young children. Be brave with them, be bold with them. And if you teach young children, young white children, young non-white children, please begin to teach white children that there is nothing innately superior about them. And please begin to teach black children that there is nothing innately inferior about them. Become more aware of the environment and less attentive to the actions of the actor, because William Shakespeare teaches us that the world is a stage and we're all actors and performers, but most of us take a perch from an observation perspective, and that allows us to disconfirm information when we see it. So I ask us to affirm through listening and also form cross racial solidarity in order to get us to another level of conversation. And I will move to the very last slide and just take a riff from Martin Luther King and, silence is betrayal. I won't unpack that for you. I will let you travel with that and make sense of it as you need to, based on one, the source, based on the fact that it's a black man there who appears to be black. What does silence is betrayal mean to you? Uh, Figure that out and make sense of it. And I hope that you weave that into your conversations moving forward. And I am greatly appreciative of the time.
Corey Best, we thank you for that mental meal that you gave us today. We had a few questions in the chat box, and I will try to get to as many as we can, but do know that if your question isn't acknowledged, that we will get to it and give you some feedback. There was a request for some books, and we might be able to send that on in an email. And I think you did touch on a little bit how to share with early education and perhaps child welfare. But we got a question about, say a little bit more about what it means to give care and not take care. And for me, there was a question of the truth of history. So there's a little bit for you, and we will be cognizant of everybody's time. We got about 5 minutes and a couple of closing out things. So, Mr. Best, if you would,
You
please.
you broke Tricoria on that first part. I heard you wanted some understanding about caretaking, not caregiving, right?
Yeah, yes, that was one of the requests in the chat box. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so what it means in sum, and I will really try to make it really simple, is think about the that black people throughout history have been taking care of white people, whether they're children, whether tilling their soil, whether making sure that their feelings are considered before their own feelings. I am not encouraging black people to not consider the feelings of others. What I am encouraging them to do when they speak truth, when we speak truth, when we speak about our experiences, be concerned less with taking care in a coddling way and giving care, because when we give our experiences, that's a gift that we give to people, and it's up to them to do something with that gift. Right? Our vulnerability, our experiences, the trauma is the gift. And also, what that means is that there's been enough data, empirical, objective data that shows the impact of whiteness on Black and brown bodies, and we also are the most studied, the most experimented with, and the least understood. My suggestion when I say give care is to allow white people to examine their whiteness, and not examine the trauma that Black people have experienced. So it's sort of an opportunity for self-examination, and also for Black people to really stand firm for their emotional well-being. I heard yesterday that there isn't, we haven't gotten to post-traumatic stress yet, because there's always prolonged stress.
Wow, that statement right there. Thank you again so much. And there are many thanks in the chat. Just to let all the participants know that there will be an evaluation in the chat at the end of today's webinar, but you will also get an email. So don't feel like if you have to hop off or you don't see it, that you won't get an opportunity to share your feedback with us. It's very important, and we are very thankful for that. And one little thing here for the Birth Parent National Network, we are always looking for new members. And by new members, we mean anyone who is interested in a strength-based preventative approach for systems that interact with families, including policy and education. So birth parents, resource parents, kinship caregivers, organizations, and any and everyone, again, who knows how important strength-based preventative approaches are. And I will go ahead and turn this over to Meryl to wrap us up for the day. Again, Brother Corey Best. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I want to just say a special thank you to you, Corey. You are, it takes a lot of courage, and we really so appreciate all your time and taking the time to really talk about difficult conversations like this. We hope this will be the first of many that we continue through the Birth Parent National Network, and we appreciate all of you as participants today for being a part of this great webinar. And I also want to say a special thank you to our two facilitators, Edward Casillas and Takoria Jones. So thank you all for the wonderful presentation today, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we hope you will plan to join us on December 3rd when we have our 2.5-hour virtual convening that will be coming up at the end of the year. So thanks all for joining, and have a great day.